On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast, we are telling the story of a high school band director that is a PMEA member that has done some amazing things outside of the music classroom. On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I'm Mark Despotakis, and on the podcast, we sometimes like to feature good news stories of the great things that PMEA members are doing in and out of the classroom. Today's show is one of those where we're talking about some good things happening, but this one is like really totally out of the classroom. But there is a classroom connection to it. So we'll explain what that is here in just a second, but let's bring our guest in for today. Shawn Campopiano is the band director at New Oxford High School in the Conewago Valley School District. Shawn, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I'm not going to bury the lead. The reason that we're here talking is because Shawn has done something absolutely extraordinary. He donated his liver. I guess it's fair to say a part of your liver, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's noble in and of itself, but there is a music connection here to how that happened. So that's your tease. That's what we're going to talk about here during the podcast. But I want to kind of tell the story a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about this background. You have a connection to Mark Morningstar, who is the person who needed a liver. Talk to us a little bit about your connection, and then what happened here that you find out he needs a liver.
Sure. So I grew up in Huntingdon County, Pennsylvania. I went to the Huntingdon area high school whenever I was really getting serious about music and feeling like this was going to be a career. And Mark ended up being my high school percussion instructor. So I was a saxophone player. However, it was a smaller school and I had more opportunities to expand my horizons. So I did things like indoor percussion, some marching band ensembles. And Mark was the lead instructor for indoor percussion, which I had done in 7th grade through 12th grade. So obviously I got to know him very well as a teacher, as a mentor. And it kind of evolved a little bit farther from that. Mark is a second father to me. I went to high school with his son, Jacob. We graduated in the same class. We were in band together. And next year I will actually be in his wedding. So, the connections keep going. It's really exciting to be so close to that family. But Mark definitely stepped in as a second father. Not to go too far into details, but, my parents both had some health conditions that they worked through while I was in high school. And Mark was there for me. He was there to support me. He took me to practices. Sometimes he took me home. He would even do a wellness check. How are you? How are things going? I mean, he might have been an instructor, but he was certainly a mentor and a father figure and somebody that you knew cared about you as a person, not just a student, not just a player, but he was there for you and your development as a person. So our relationship grew pretty close. And then as I, went to college, got my undergraduate degree, started working, he was surely very supportive of that along the way. Moving into his diagnosis, it was about December of 2021. He started feeling unwell, ended up in the hospital. After a couple weeks of tests, it was determined that he had stage 3 liver cancer as well as cirrhosis of the liver. It was all treatable, but it would rely on a transplant. So that's kind of how everything got started. Another band parent from Huntingdon, from Mark's tenure, became his champion. So if anybody's unfamiliar with that process, the champion is the person who helps to find a donor, preferably a living donor. Living donor procedures are a lot safer. They're a lot more successful statistically. So his champion started doing some things on Facebook, creating a group, some advertising that Mark was in search of a liver. After I'd say probably a couple months, I decided that it was worth getting tested. I knew that, I'm someone who's relatively young, somebody who should be of good enough health that it might be worth looking into it. And that's kind of how it all got started. So I went to UPMC up in Pittsburgh for a day, got a lot of testing done, checked to see if I was a match. And lo and behold, it was a match, and that's kind of how it all got started.
So let me ask you a question on the match piece. Is that, I mean, was that a pretty big surprise? I mean, is it hard to make a match for a liver?
Um, we're starting the Let me put it this way. We're starting to get past the point of blood types being as important. So, there came that time where if your blood type wasn't compatible, the organ transplant wouldn't have been successful. That's starting to change. It's changing slowly. But for me, I knew I was a universal donor. So for the blood type perspective, I knew that there was a pretty decent chance. But with meeting with the surgeon the day of all my evaluations, the one thing he said is, um, you probably don't have the right size liver. So at that point, I was kind of thinking, well, this probably isn't going to work. I'm glad I checked it out, at least got tested, because you never know who's going to be the match. But I got a call about 2 weeks later while I was back in my hometown of Huntingdon, and they said, you are actually a match. And if you're ready, we're going to set up the surgery for next month. How would you feel?
Wow. And how did you feel in that moment?
Overwhelmed, I think, was actually the understatement. I truly wasn't expecting it, knowing that after the evaluation, hearing that news that they probably didn't think it was going to be a match, to find out it was certainly overwhelming. At that point, Mark had already been to the hospital twice for what they thought might be a successful deceased donor. But that process is very complicated because you only have a certain number of hours to get that organ to the recipient and then get it tested. So if they think they have somebody, they'll bring the recipient in, but you never know until it happens. So after 2 close calls but no success, it was really exciting to know that this was going to work out.
Okay, wow. That okay, blows my mind so far. All right, so you hear, all right, it's we're gonna do this in a month. What is this month of your life like, knowing that okay, you're going and doing this major thing, and you're a high school band director, so that's a year-round job. How does that play into all of your thought process as well?
Um, it was pretty unique. Usually, the first person you call might be a recipient, but the first person I called was my high school principal. And I said, I was actually on my way to Oregon like 2 days after this phone call because I was finishing my master's degree this summer as well. And I called him and said, this is something that I'm really passionate about. I think at the end of the day, as much as I value my profession and the opportunity to work with my students, this personal decision was more important than my professional life. And I have an administrative team that really understands that and supports it. And the first thing my principal told me was, I admire this and we're going to make it happen. So once I heard that, I felt a little bit better. The surgery, it happened on July 21st, which was about 9 days before band camp. So that's where a lot of the anxiety came from me. I thought, how am I going to pull off a band camp for a competitive marching band with no band director? And that's where the community of New Oxford itself really kicks in. I love working here. I love being a part of this community because I just have the best administrators, the best band parents, and I hope that a lot of us feel this way and get to feel the sense of gratitude where we are. But to know that this community was going to step up for me and for our students, I mean, I still get choked up about it. I'm still so emotional every time I reflect on it because that's just something that we don't get to experience everywhere. And frankly, I don't think we get to experience that in other content areas either. So all that in mind, I set up a day by day Google Sheet for our band camp, set up by hour with what I hoped we would do, who I hoped would run it, suggestions, links to videos for our leadership team. And we tried to make it work by a Google Sheet schedule. I was actually not here for almost the entirety of band camp. I got here on the last day just in time to see the parent preview performance. So they really pulled it off without me. We had band parents here at all hours of the day, making sure things were running smoothly. The staff of our marching band just stepped up to the next level. I mean, for those who are band directors in any level, you know that there's so much administrative work that goes on beyond the teaching. And they just jumped right into it and went for it. And that was admirable to say the least. And then, of course, our middle school band director, who was formerly in this position, so I have a colleague and a mentor in him, volunteered his mornings to come and teach drill. So professionally, I was covered. And I can't think of another situation where somebody would be so well covered professionally due to a personal choice like this, and that's just one of the things that's going to live with me forever. Just knowing that so many people stepped up in so many different ways to make sure that this program and this band continued while I was recovering.
I think you're right. It speaks to the uniqueness of our field. There's this built-in community to it as well. But then at that really local level in your school, that community is so tight. So I think that's amazing, and of course that's also how you had this connection to Mark from that community. So let me go back and talk a little bit about then like the surgery. So you both come to Pittsburgh? You're both essentially having the surgery on the same day. Is that how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the procedure was scheduled on the 21st, which I think was a Thursday. Mark and I both reported 2 days early for our COVID test, our blood work, everything like that to make sure that we were all set. And then on the day of the procedure, we both arrived to the hospital at the same time. We were able to wait with each other. We were in the same waiting area as one another. And then I went in first. So we actually had the same surgical team, a couple extras here or there. I went in at about 7 o'clock a.m. and my transplant begun immediately. So my surgeon immediately removed the right lobe of my liver and prepared it to go into Mark. So Mark went in at about, I think it was about 8:30 or 9, just a little bit after me, and they started preparing for him. So they took care of the cancerous portion of his liver and removing that, getting him ready for the transplant. And then my surgeon, I guess I should say our surgeon, as soon as my liver was ready, it went right across the hall, and that's when the transplant happened. So we both finished our procedures within hours of one another and ended up in the same ICU unit later that night.
So what is the recovery, like for both of you in that situation? I mean, ICU, that's serious. I mean, that's how I view it. And maybe that's just maybe a standard thing after surgery, but I mean, what was the kind of that immediate recovery like for you? For both of you,
For
actually.
for me, it was actually a little bit, I don't want to say worse, but it's a little bit more difficult. So the great thing about this whole story is my recipient's doing phenomenally well, kind of just exceeding expectations along the way. So the surgical ICU is very normal given the extent of the surgery, um, but the first day or two is a lot of just letting your body kind of slowly wake itself up and relax and be ready to take the next step of healing. Mark was on a ventilator whenever he was removed from surgery, which is very normal. But he was actually awake and talking the same night as the procedure, which is a little unheard of. So his body accepted the organ very well and frankly very quickly, which is always a relief because whenever you're going through a procedure like this, the last thing you want is a complication. I, on the other hand, took a little bit longer to get through it. I was in the hospital for about 7 days. 5 of those I was not too with it, not really able to walk, and that's a really important part to getting out. So I was a little bit nervous about the recovery period, but after those 7 days, when we both got out, the recovery happened a lot faster than I would have expected. It is about 8 to 12 weeks. So for me, my full recovery is about the end of October. And each day you just get a little bit closer as my liver starts to regenerate and that left lobe takes over where that right lobe used to be. Um, my responsibility is to eat well, to walk, to listen to my body and sleep, so that by the time we get to the end of October, I should pretty much function like nothing ever happened.
And let's remind everyone again, end of October is end of competitive marching band season, give or take. So the busiest time of the year already for a marching band director, and that's it's essentially your entire marching band season is defined by this year, which is I guess this will probably be the wildest season you ever have, I would think.
I hope so. I don't know. I still think trying to put something together in the fall of 2020 might be a little bit crazier than this.
Fair
Um,
enough.
but the timing is not perfect, but I don't think there's any such thing as good timing. And sometimes the sacrifices are just so much more worth it to have to wear an abdominal binder and not be able to stretch or run or lift for a few months whenever it's adding years to somebody else's life who means so much to so many, 100% worth it. And again, just the community that we have here that is in support to allow that to happen, I think it's just incredible. I could not do this if I didn't have a community that was behind me, and I do. And I will carry that with me forever. I will always know that that community was behind me to help me to make sure not only that I was well, but that our kids had an equally great experience. So I hope that as we go through this marching band season, the students not only recognize the gifts that they have and what they can really step up to do on their own, but I hope they also recognize how fortunate we are to have a parent system and an administrative system that is behind us every step of the way.
I think folks can tell you're obviously at school, right? We're
Sure
taking
am.
this after school, so you're back to work on a daily basis. I mean, is that like you're there morning, going through the day, and then if you come back for afternoon or evening rehearsal, go to the football games, you're doing the whole thing, but with just some extra rest in there, right?
Yes. This is our second week of school, so I am still learning what that looks like and what that feels like. So far it has been work through the day. My teaching schedule is actually really convenient. That's allowing me to not exert myself too much physically. I teach class piano and instrumental ensembles and small group instruction right now. So a lot of that I can either do seated or I can do it while walking. It's not too physically laborious. But in the afternoons, I take a wonderful 20-minute nap, and then I come back in the evening for our rehearsal, which normally runs about 6 to 9. Um, I guess an interesting story on this is I believe this might be the strangest work memory I have to date. Friday was our first football game. It was away. I didn't quite have time to go home. So I actually brought my zero gravity chair to school. I got to the end of the school day. We didn't have the band room open for another hour for students. So there was an hour there just for rest. And I absolutely set up my lawn chair in the middle of the band room and took a nap. I never thought that that would happen, but it did. And that's just what I need to do to get through so that I am still holding up my end of the bargain as far as healing goes. Luckily, everybody's been very understanding of that, but it's finding the balance. And I understand it's different for everybody. I know that there are other donors that haven't been as lucky in their recovery and things haven't gone quite as smoothly. And I just happen to be lucky enough that so far so good.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Mark is doing well also?
Mark is doing very well. He was able to come home from Pittsburgh about 3 weeks after the procedure, which is pretty early. Normally, it's 4 to 6 weeks that you
Wow.
need to be very close to the hospitals. They work on tweaking anti-rejection meds, and they want to make sure that the body is continuing to accept the organ and the organ is functioning in its role. So that's been going really well. He made it home early, and he has not had to go back for any complications since. He is a patient who listens to the doctor's orders and takes that very seriously. For me, that gives me a lot of peace of mind because whenever you're thinking about making the choice, you want to make sure you're doing it for somebody who will take it seriously, and he absolutely has. So I think his recovery is a testament to his following instructions, but also his positivity and his outlook on life.
So we showed some pictures earlier of both of you in the hospital. These are some pictures of you together. This is prior to the operation, correct?
Yes, this was actually reveal day. This was just a couple days after I had gotten the phone call. So whenever I got the phone call, I went over to his house. I forget I made up some excuse.
Oh,
But
he
we
didn't
were talking,
know.
and no, he
He
did
didn't
not know.
really.
So I actually had the opportunity to share that with him and his family and his son Jacob, who of course I'm super close to because we're still best friends and graduated together. So I just happened to be in Huntington. I went over to his house, sat on the back porch and said, I know you've been looking for a while. And I was able to say, how does July 21st sound to you? And of course the answer is that sounds great. So those pictures were from our reveal. And it also aligned with a fundraiser that was happening for Mark that was being run by two other PMEA members from Huntington County.
So is that this picture then?
Yes, it is.
So
So
tell us about this.
this is Mr. Richard Kane and Mr. Jordan Canner. Jordan's the band director at my alma mater of Huntington High School. Rick is the elementary music specialist at, I believe it's Southside Elementary School, but it is also part of the Huntington Area School District. They were, well, Rick was a student of Mark's, eventually a colleague. And Jordan was the high school band director while Mark was the percussion instructor during my high school years. So during the day of the reveal, they were setting up a fundraiser to walk 100,000 steps in one day to help raise money towards Mark's medical expenses, but also raise awareness for the need of living donors and what it's like to be a living donor.
Wow. I mean, it's crazy how that everything just kind of came together at that one time. So, as you look back on this, is you're kind of in the middle of the recovery stage, I would say. What do you have some takeaways already? I mean, I think you shared some of them, but what's your mindset now having gone through this?
For me, I think a lot of people talk about the sacrifice of a donor, and for me personally, I don't necessarily feel that way. For the sake that, kind of like I mentioned earlier, talking about an 8 to 12 week recovery period um, for a procedure that's saving someone's life, that was an easy decision for me to make, because I just know that he has influenced so many students and so many people, and he deserves to see his granddaughter grow up, and he deserves to see his son get married. So that was an easy one for me. Another takeaway for me, I guess, from an educational perspective, is never forget the opportunity we have as music educators to teach some life lessons that other content areas just don't get the opportunity to scratch the surface on. I've been able to talk to my students about time commitment, sacrifice, humility, compassion, teamwork. I mean, they've been along this ride with me. This hasn't been something that I've done and they've dealt with. This is something that we talk about. This is something that we interact with. And I think it's important that they get to see the humanity in their teachers. And I hope that that's going to encourage them to be more caring, compassionate, and humble human beings whenever they graduate from this program. So my big two takeaways are: we are so lucky to be in a genre where we get to teach vulnerability, and we should never lose sight of the opportunity we have to instill those values in our kids as well.
My next question was going to be, what's the message to others? But I think you've already answered that, because you're sharing this with your students, and I mean, I would imagine an entire school community through just being part of this process. If this would have, say, happened all throughout the summer and not into the school year, I mean, there would have been some overlap maybe, and you could have shared the story, but they're really living through as you're doing this. And I just think that is absolutely an incredible way to have this play out.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And sometimes it's little things, like whenever I walk in before a marching band rehearsal and we don't have a long ranger set up, and I have to point to the thing on the floor and say, "Hi, I can't pick this up. Could somebody get it?" And they're right on it. Or having to plan for things like leading stretches. I physically cannot do that at risk of injuring myself or damaging my incision. So them being able to take the ownership of looking up, dynamic stretches that work for marching band, that's a great one. Having them take initiative on team building and teamwork, because I wasn't around to do that. So they are certainly gaining some more valuable life skills. And I think it also is teaching me that I can trust my kids to do more than I remember sometimes. It's really easy for me to try to hold on to that control and just lead everything exactly where I want it to go, but that's not the way that we work most efficiently.
Yeah, and maybe that's another that's a takeaway for some music teachers out there, and probably high school band directors especially. So Shawn, I think this is incredibly noble what you have done. You are so humble about it. I'm amazed that you've gone through all of this, and you're still going through all of it, and what you're doing. So thank you so much. I'm sure Mark thanks you so much as well. Thanks for joining us to talk about this today.
Thanks so much. I hope if anybody listening or watching gets anything of this, I hope it's just a reminder of the value of what we do and the opportunity that we have to be a part of a bigger community than just our classroom.
Yeah, and we all have certainly have ways to do that. So best to you as you recover, best to the marching band, as you continue the football season and the competitive season here this fall.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Shawn. And thank you all for joining us on really this incredible Take Note podcast. What an incredible story. We're so glad that Shawn is a PMEA member doing some amazing things and teaching some incredible lessons. So again, thank you all for joining us on this Take Note podcast. And we want to thank our sponsor, the Grove City College Department of Music. We will see you next time.